Hello, Algebra 2 folks, and welcome to Graphing Sine and Cosine Functions. This time we're going to talk about some vertical shifts, that's up and down. But before we do that, let's recall what we know about all shifting and transformations. So remember when we graphed parabolas and we had the parent function y equals x squared? We always talked about what would happen to the graph if we added 2 or subtracted 5 or whatever we were doing to the graph. How would the graph change? Where would it move? Where would it transform to? So let's talk about each one of these 1 through 4 and find out what we would say is happening to the new graph. Okay, so number 1, y equals x squared plus 2. From the parent, what's happening? Remember, the plus 2 meant we moved up 2, okay? Y equals x squared minus 5, that meant we moved down 5. Y equals negative parentheses x minus 1 quantity squared. Oh, that's inside, so that's not an up or down, that's a left or a right. And in this case, we would say x would have to be x minus 1 equals 0. What gets us 0? That would be a positive 1. So this would be right 1. Uh-oh. What transformation happens with a negative out in front? Ah, yes, you are right. Reflected, a reflection over the x-axis, okay? Which means it flipped upside down, correct? Y equals x plus 3 quantity squared plus 4. Ooh, this has an inside and an outside. Opposite of positive 3 would be negative 3. That means I'm going to move left 3, and the 4 is up 4. So if you don't remember this, you might want to get this down in your notes, pause a minute and get it in your notes, because it's really important that you know how to do these. Because we're going to do the same kind of concept today, but we're only going to talk about the vertical shifting and maybe a negative with a reflection. Then tomorrow we're going to focus on the horizontal shifting. So make sure that you have these transformations down so you can recall them if you need to. All right, let's do a couple of examples and then we'll be done for the day. These need to go into your notes. First, we're going to just talk about all the steps again, making sure we've added the vertical shifting in place. So the step 1 that we've always done is always find the amplitude, right? So the amplitude is the absolute value of A. You know, you might already have this stuff written down, but make sure that you know in what order you're going to find stuff. Determine the period. Remember, the period is 2 pi divided by B. So A hasn't changed, B hasn't changed. The increment is your period divided by 4. That hasn't changed. But now what you need to do is you need to determine the vertical shift. The vertical shift is your K. So this thing is your vertical shift, and that now is important because what it does and what it gives us is that it gives us our new midline. Remember we talked about midline being always 0, the x-axis? That is the case if there is no vertical shifting. So we must know how to find and identify the vertical shift so that we can find our new midline. Okay? So let's go through a couple of examples. Both of the examples need to be in your notes. Let's start with y equals 3 sine of 2x minus 2. So amplitude is the absolute value of A. This is still A, so it's 3. The period is 2 pi divided by B, and this is your B. And 2 pi divided by 2 is just pi. And the increment is the period divided by 4, so pi over 4. And our vertical shift is down 2. Okay, so that means our line is going to be K equals negative 2. Okay, that is our new midline. And that's going to be important. All right, so let's start by graphing the x and y axes. Okay, and now we're going to have to do colors. So I expect all colors being used now from this point on. So remember, I always do my amplitude in blue. So I'm going to go ahead and do my amplitude in blue. But before I do that, I need to do my midline. Because before the midline used to be just the x-axis. Now it's not the x-axis anymore. So I do my midline in red. So my midline is at 2. Y equals -2. That's my horizontal line. So at -2, I'm going to draw my midline. I'm going to label that my midline, and I'm going to call it y equals -2. Okay. And now I'm going to get my amplitude, my blue color, and do my amplitude. Now this is kind of different because I'm not going 3 up from 0 and 3 down from 0. You must do the amplitude from the midline. So 3 up from the midline would be 1, 2, and that would be at 1. So at 1 is my new high points. This is where my high points will be. And then the lowest points of your graph will be 3 down from -2. 1, 2, 3, which is -5. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Sorry about that. So -5 would be right here. So now we aren't going from the same number, negative to positive. We're going to different numbers because our midline has changed. All right, now we'll do the increments. When we do the increments, I still put them on the x-axis, but it might be easier if you don't put them on the x-axis. For most of you, putting them on the midline would probably be the best place to put them because then you'll remember where the middle point is. So I'm going to go ahead and just put them on the midline. And that's what you should do always. So pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, and 4 pi over 4. Then we'll know if that is the midline. We'll always know where we're supposed to go. Negative pi over 4, -2 pi over 4, -3 pi over 4, and -4 pi over 4. All right, now we have to graph our 5 critical points. So one of the critical points, we have to figure out if we're going to start high or in the middle. We have sine. So sine means you start in the middle. So we're going to start at the midline. And then we're going to go up to 1, back down to the midline, down to -5, back up to the midline. And that will be our graph. Then on the left-hand side, we go down to -5, up to the midline, up to 1, back down to the midline, and we continue our wave function. Arrows on both sides. Domain, x such that x equals all reals, just like always. And now our range, we have to look at these blue lines, okay? So whatever color you're using, just make sure you're looking at your high and your low. So it would be y is less than or equal to 1, but greater than or equal to -5 because it's between 1 and -5. All right, let's try one more. So we have y equals negative cosine 4x plus 1. All right, let's start by finding the amplitude. The amplitude is a, the absolute value of that. So the absolute value of -1 is 1. Your period is 2 pi over b. B is 4, so this is 1/2 pi. The increment is 1/4 times the period. So that would be 1/8 pi. And then the vertical shift is up 1, which means our k is 1. So our midline is going to be y equals 1. All right, so we're going to graph our x and y axes. Okay, and we are going to begin always with our midline. Okay, I do my midline in red, so I'm going to go up 1. That's my midline. Y equals 1. And then I can do my amplitude. My amplitude I always do in blue, and that is up. Amplitude is 1, so I go up 1 from the midline and down 1 from the midline. So we are going to be at 2, and we are going to be at 0. I'm going to erase this a little bit here and redraw that because I was off just a little bit. You can draw a little bit better than I can. There you go. And then I'm going to go back to get blue and get my bottom here, and this would be 0. So my midline is 1, and I got the lower dash done, and the upper dash would be at 2. All right, so then I'm going to go ahead and put my increments in. I'm going to go ahead and put them on the midline so I know where I'm going to put them. So I have 1/8 pi, so this is 1/8 pi. I have 2 pi over 8. I have 3 pi over 8, and I've got 4 pi over 8. Then over here it's negative 1/8 pi, negative 2 pi over 8, negative 3 pi over 8, and negative 4 pi over 8. Okay, now I can go ahead and do my 5 critical points. My 5 critical points, I got to figure out what I have. Oh, I have a cosine, but I have a negative cosine. So the negative means I'm going to reflect it over the x-axis. So that means where would cosine normally start? Cosine would normally start high, but because I'm doing a reflection, it's really going to start low. Okay, so it's opposite of what you would think because there's a negative cosine. So I'm going to start low, and I'm going to go up to my midline, up to the high point, back down to my midline, back to the low point, and draw my curve, my wave. Oops, I missed it right there a little bit. Then I go back up to the midline, up to the high, back to the midline, and back to the low. And draw my curve. Arrows on both sides. And that is my 5 critical points. And the domain would be x such that x equals all reals. And my range is from 0 to 2. So y is less than or equal to 2, but greater than or equal to 0. And that is all I have. Thank you for taking good notes, and we'll be practicing this tomorrow.